you, Kevin. So happy to be joined this week by Jane Disher. All of you know her as the hotline. So she and I are going to take some of our common questions that we hear on a regular basis and answer them for you now. One thing I wanted to say before we get started, I'm sure you all saw the announcement yesterday from New Jersey talking about lifting the mask requirement. Still not 100% clear what that's going to mean for private businesses. So that's a stay tuned kind of situation. Just like Pennsylvania, New Jersey currently has an order in place saying that masks are required in private businesses. So we want to follow CDC guidance, but we also want to follow whatever our state is saying. So again, stay tuned. And if something happens of significance next week while we do not have a town hall, we'll definitely make sure to get out an alert on that so you can see that. All right, so we're going to launch in. So I'm going to take the first question. You may all remember that one of the issues that came up at the beginning of the pandemic was we're hiring people and we have these I-9s that we need to fill out. And part of the I-9 process has always been reviewing documents in person. So that was a little bit of a quandary. And then the government told us it's okay to check those documents out virtually, to look at them over a Zoom or what have you. So now that we're returning, or at least some of us are returning to the physical workplace, what steps, if any, do we have to take with regard to the I-9 forms that we completed remotely during the pandemic? Well, you didn't think you were going to get away with doing nothing, right? DHS is telling us if you were hired employees who were working remotely during the pandemic and you confirmed their documents virtually during that time, when they come back to the office or when you come back to the office, now is the time to physically inspect them. And of course, DHS doesn't want to give you a lot of time to do that. You want to do it within 3 business days. So if you're in the process right now of coming back to the physical workspace, get your processes in place for checking out your I-9 documentation.
So can I just add something? I mentioned before we started, I just saw something from SHRM that they are strongly pushing and advocating for making this arrangement permanent, where you will be able to virtually inspect the documents. And I think as we look at return to the workplace, a lot of places are going hybrid. So, this may be something that DHS will reconsider. We can hope.
Yeah, and if they do, we'll absolutely let you guys know. Maybe a little bit of a stay tuned kind of a situation. All right, Jane, I'm going to turn this one over to you.
Are you advancing the slides, or?
I just did. Hopefully there's not a delay.
Okay, great. So the good news is, I guess, as much as we've been focused on COVID, there are other things happening and business does continue to go on. So as we've seen in the past, lots of questions from our members around the issue of FMLA. So in this case, we've got an employee who has exhausted their full 12 weeks of leave, but the doctor says they need an additional 3 weeks of leave before they'll be able to return to work. And the question is, are you required to approve the additional time? So it's important to remember that leave may be an accommodation under ADA. And of course, there is no specific amount of leave time that is required as an accommodation. And you still need to provide the accommodation unless doing so would cause an undue hardship for you, which is a fairly high bar to meet. So it's really up to the employer's discretion to determine if and when, or if and how much leave is reasonable. But in this case, the requested 3 weeks of leave may not have a significant impact on operations. So it may be considered a reasonable accommodation here.
Yeah, and I would add in most cases, 3 weeks, a judge or a jury is not going to buy that an additional 3 weeks is an undue hardship on your business, barring a really unusual circumstance. All right, next question. In this difficult recruiting environment, we're offering sign-on bonuses for non-exempt employees who sometimes work overtime. Does the bonus need to be calculated or included in their regular rate of pay for overtime calculation? And I don't have any animation on this slide for some reason, but I was, thinking it might give you all heart attacks before I advance to the answer. The good answer is probably not. Particularly if you don't have a clawback provision in the sign-on bonus. For the most part, Department of Labor is saying that these sign-on bonuses are either gifts or that they're not tied to quality or quantity of work performed. Therefore, it doesn't need to be included in your regular rate for overtime calculations. Of course, check state law as well. It would not impact Pennsylvania state law, but there might be some states out there, think California, where this could be an issue for you. But just something to keep in mind. I know we're all out there in this very competitive recruiting environment. We're doing everything we can to get the right people coming to work for us, but we also need to remember that some of those moves that we make might have additional impacts down the line. So just the kind of stuff you should be keeping in mind.
Okay, so another FMLA related question. Can an employee who's going out for a medical issue request that they use PTO instead of taking FMLA? Well, the issue here is as soon as you as the employer have enough information to determine whether the leave is being taken for an FMLA qualifying reason, so their own serious health condition or to care for a family member, etc., you must notify the employee as to whether the leave will be designated and counted as FMLA leave. Employees don't have the right to choose when leave will be designated as FMLA by the employer. As soon as the leave qualifies for FMLA, it should be designated as such, regardless of what the employee wants in this particular case.
Yeah, because it's a question we get a lot. The employee didn't want us to designate it as an FMLA. The key, one of the keys for the employer, though, is to do this in a timely manner. A lot of times what we hear from employers is, oh, this employee took leave three months ago, and now they want to take leave again, and they don't want any of it to count as FMLA. What do we do? The key is really being timely about your designation of FMLA.
Right.
It's much harder to go back and retroactively.
And I also just stress to the employee that one of the biggest benefits of FMLA is job protection. So why wouldn't you want the leave designated as FMLA?
Absolutely.
Part of the union.
Okay. Question we're getting a lot. For those of you who have voluntarily extended the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, people are saying, well, we know that we could take the FFCRA paid leave for our own vaccination purposes, but what about to get a family member vaccinated? I need to drive my 16-year-old or my 14-year-old to go get a vaccine, or I need to take care of my 14-year-old who's not feeling well the next day after getting the vaccine. Unfortunately, the FFCRA does not cover that. Doesn't mean that you as an employer can't extend your own PTO time for that, but keep in mind that no, if you're extending the FFCRA, there's just a handful of reasons that the employee can take the paid time off for which you will ultimately get the tax credit. So you'll see 6 and 7 there. It's the employee getting their own vaccination, or the employee recovering from their own vaccination. Nothing to do with family members.
Okay, next question. So we have an employee handbook, yay, but you haven't done a comprehensive review in a couple of years. So how important is it that we update handbooks on a regular basis? And I think this is really, really important. And for all of you who have ever called the hotline, you know, when we're talking issues, one of my first questions is generally, tell me what your policy says, because that's the first place that we look. So that's an important reason to make sure that your handbooks are current. But if we also look over the past 14, 15 months, I forget how long it's been now, the way we work has changed dramatically. And again, this past year has really proven that. So for example, if we look at pre-COVID, many employers didn't have a telecommuting policy, but now do because of the pandemic. We look at emergency closure policies, which were previously limited really to inclement weather. That's what we thought about when we thought about emergency closing. So those now need to be expanded to cover other emergencies like a pandemic. And we also look at how technology is changing the way that we work, that if this had happened to us, 10 years ago, we didn't have Zoom, how would we have been able to connect? So the other point to keep in mind is we have a new administration in Washington. So laws will be changing, and the union issue is an example of that, and one to start to think about and act on now. This administration has promised to strengthen public and private sector unions and to encourage and incentivize unionization and collective bargaining. And for employers, the best defense is a good offense. And so how your company culture is defined and conveyed in your handbook can help mitigate union interest. And also your handbook can really help employees understand the benefits of working for your company, because I think this is something that's really important to they understand the total value of being employed. and also can outline boundaries for solicitation and distribution, which will be important if you ever find yourself in a situation where a union is expressing interest.
Absolutely. And I'll give the little plug that MEA can help you if you're looking at a handbook review. So let us know. Okay. We're thinking about developing a maternity paternity policy as part of your handbook. What guidance can you provide? So certainly in this environment, employers are looking at everything they can in terms of benefits for their employees. What are those extra things that we can give to encourage people to come to work for our organization or to stay working for our organization? And maternity paternity policies are certainly one of them. But you need to remember that we can't discriminate on against people on the basis of their gender. So just you don't want to have a separate maternity and paternity policy. You want to have a parental leave policy. It's okay to distinguish between your employee who gave birth and needs to recover from birth versus an employee who is doing baby bonding. But you don't want to call it maternity and paternity and differentiate it that way. And also remember, if you're covered under FMLA or under some state equivalent to FMLA, you want those policies to run concurrently. You don't want to all of a sudden find yourself in a situation where you've given 12 weeks of leave under your policy, and then the employee gets another 12 weeks of leave under federal or state law.
Okay, so final question, and this is one we get a lot, which is when can we withhold money? For example, an employee who's leaving fails to return company equipment from an employee's check. And under Pennsylvania state law, and again, this is Pennsylvania, any wage deduction must be for the benefit of the employee and only if the employee authorizes such deductions in writing. And the other thing to keep in mind is that docking an exempt employee's pay can be a violation of federal FLSA standards, where if you dock a non-exempt employee's pay and they fall below the minimum wage threshold, you would be in violation. So just a couple of things to keep in mind. This is regulated by state law. So if you've got a question about whether or not you can do this, give us a call and we can give you guidance in that area.
And spoiler alert, under most state laws, you cannot make the deductions from the last paycheck. You really want to have something in writing with the employee, but not only in writing with the employee for the specific deduction that you're talking about. Right. So I was just having this conversation with a member yesterday. What can we do about employees who, especially now that we're remote, employee quits and we never get the laptop back. It's a tough situation. It's something to think about before you give people laptops, right? And I know we all went out during a pandemic last year without giving maybe that a lot of thought, but you want to have processes in place to go ahead and get that stuff back. There are some situations where it could be a criminal situation. There are a lot of police departments don't want to get involved in the employer and the employee situation. You could also sue the employee in small claims court to get the laptop back or get the money back, but you'll probably spend more money pursuing the small claims court action than you would actually getting the laptop back. But all things to be thinking about as you have employees working remotely and you're giving them equipment. How are you getting that stuff back? Okay, so moving on to our next part of the presentation. We get so many questions from our members about what's everybody else doing? Okay, and we can sort of tell you anecdotally, well, I had this conversation yesterday, I had this conversation yesterday, but we thought it would be great to get, 100 of our closest friends, 100 plus of our closest friends here to weigh in. So what we're first going to do is a poll, and we'll share those poll results with you. I assume we can put those in the email that goes out after this. We can share those poll results, but if you guys would all vote, and then the next thing we're going to do is we'll go into breakout rooms, but I'll let you guys vote, give you some time here. And as soon as we're done with that, I'll explain how the breakout rooms are going to work.
Amy, can you hear me?
Yep. Yes.
This is Kevin. One question came in while I was doing it, which I thought would be good for everyone to hear the answer. So someone said, can I post a list of vaccinated employees? And I know one of the big questions people have is how to distinguish between people that have vaccinated and those who haven't. Can you just kind of comment on that?
We're getting this question a lot on Hotline, and unfortunately, I don't have a fantastic answer for you because on the one hand, we think that vaccination status is private medical information. Maybe, maybe not. On the other hand, as soon as you say our vaccinated folks can go walk around without masks and our unvaccinated folks can't, it's pretty clear who your vaccinated people and your unvaccinated people are. Although you still should give the option to your vaccinated employees to wear a mask if they want to, but you're delineating pretty easily. And that's what's always made me a little bit uneasy about making the distinction. But then the question becomes, okay, so we're in a meeting, and we know the vaccinated don't have to socially distance and don't have to wear a mask. And we know the unvaccinated have to kind of sit off to the side and wear a mask. How is that individual supervisor who's running the meeting going to know the difference? So my best answer for you is treat this like any other medical information that you have, need to know basis. It's
Oh, go ahead. And one company shared, which I thought that has already kind of made a decision here, is what they're saying is when they're identifying who has given proof of vaccination. So they're kind of using a little snippet to say, look, we're only going to allow someone not to wear a mask that has given us proof. And so that's what they're giving people indications of. But,
right. And also keep it, with the caveat too, that people who are fully vaccinated are more than welcome to wear a mask as well. So it adds a little bit of a, mystery if you want. It doesn't specifically delineate, but as far as if you've got individual managers or supervisors running meetings and they need to know who's vaccinated and who's not, because they need to know who could be wearing a mask and who's not. I'm just saying need to know basis, kind of similar to FMLA information, kind of similar to ADA type information. If you have a supervisor who needs to know the ADA information so they can facilitate a reasonable accommodation, then you would give them that information. And I think it's similar here. So, you don't want to be, you're not posting it on a wall. You're not giving out bracelets or buttons, but I think about who in the organization needs to know who's vaccinated and who's not, so that they can do their job and do it safely and maintain that safe workplace that we're all obligated to maintain. So, okay, I think we're going into our breakouts.